There are still spots available for the media scientists. I think there's one available for today, and there are several for Thursday and Friday. And if you haven't signed up and you would like so, please let us know as soon as possible. We've posted the answers from the practical exercise that we did yesterday. And if you go to the website and then under the Tuesday section, you'll see the answers now available from Christine's practical exercises. So please go there and take a look. We've had a problem yesterday, as most of you experienced, with the PBS scheduling. And as soon as we finished the office hours, CISO engineers were able to identify and fix the problem. So that was around 3 p.m. I want to just say a big thanks to CISO for doing that. And also, it was frustrating. It was frustrating for me as well, like experiencing this, but this is part of our life, like working with a supercomputer. It happens. It's not infrequent that that kind of problem happens. And I just want to remind everyone that if you, whether on Cheyenne or any other system, experience a problem on the supercomputer, there's always a team of experts on behind the scenes that are there to help us. In the case of the Cheyenne and Casper supercomputers, we have the CISO user support. You can email CISO help, or you can call this line. There's always someone available to help, and they're pretty quick at responding to the issues that we face. So please take advantage of that. A reminder, we've already closed the poll for today's land model Q&A, but the ones for tomorrow and Friday are still open, and they will close 5 p.m. the day before the session. So please submit your questions as soon as possible. And then finally, I just want to see if there's any other comments or questions from you guys before we pass to Peter and the land modelers. I know there's a question on chat related to having trouble with create a new case. And also I see another one, CESM merchandise. Okay, so the first question, we'll sort it out on the office hours today. The morning session will be dedicated to the theoretical part related to the land model. So if you want to reach out to me in a separate, maybe we can, in between, like lunchtime, we can meet and try to work together. But if not, during lunchtime, during the office hours in the afternoon, we'll definitely take care of your question. And then Tim, I don't know where we can have the CSM merchandise available. Do you know, Elizabeth? And Peter's t-shirt was a special event from the bike ride that we do for the CSM workshop.
We haven't had merchandise available for a long time. It has to do with we have no arm that's able to really handle money that way. I've heard that back in the day, there was like a gift shop in the lobby of one of our buildings, but that was a long time ago.
Yeah, when you come visit us, Jim, we'll make sure you get one. Okay, well, thank you, everybody, and I'll pass it to Peter.
Thanks, Gustavo. Yeah, it's exciting to be here and to see everybody online, and thanks for everyone joining. I'm going to put up a PowerPoint, and haven't used this computer before with sharing, so it could be a little confusing, but I'm going to start with this. And just tell me if that's sharing fine. Gustavo, can you?
Yeah.
Can you see that? Is that all work fine?
Yeah, it's small, but we can see.
Right. Okay. So I've got a big screen. I haven't used it before for sharing. So, okay. So what I wanted to start off with is just taking you through the land Q&A session, and big thanks to Dave Lawrence, Daniel Kennedy, Danica Lombardozzi, Katie Dagan, Keith Olson, and Will Weeder, who are going to help out with many of the questions we come up with today. So I guess the first thing I want to do is go into the quiz that we sort of put out there. And this quiz wasn't really to test your knowledge. It was more to get you thinking about the land model and what sort of things you can do with the land model in your research. I'm going to go through, and Gustavo, is it okay if I put the answers to the quiz here, or is that?
Yeah, well, normally we have launched the quiz, let them answer, then you give the answer.
Right, sorry, I didn't realize that. So I want to just skip through that quickly, and we'll start off with the quiz, and then I'll go through the answers to it when we've done the quiz. Sorry, I didn't realize that was something they hadn't done yet.
Of course.
Okay. And yeah, and to think about this is just more just to get you thinking about like the model rather than like really testing whether you've studied up on the model or what the implications are. So I just fill it out, and yeah, as we go through it, you can just answer the questions as you sort of see fit to what you would expect and what you think about the model and how it works. So Gustavo, I don't see it really updating. How does this work?
Elizabeth can see how many people have responded, the percentage, and can you tell us, Elizabeth, when we reach like around 75% or so?
I can, yep.
That doesn't take too long. Maybe like another minute. Thank you.
Only one person's answered the whole thing so far, so we might need to give, the questions are a little long. We'll need to give a few more minutes.
Ese huevito allá. Lo frío y después lo calientas.
No te preocupes.
We're at 11 people have answered, 31%.
All right, well, you know, it's fine because it really was more to get people thinking about it rather than trying to demonstrate people's knowledge of the model. So having gone through the quiz, what I might do is just go through the answers very quickly. And do you want to wrap that up in a little bit, Elizabeth, or should?
Sure, I'll go ahead and end it now.
Okay. And share the results. Okay, and what's sort of really interesting when we think about the model is, I'm going to put the quiz across here for a second, is that there are a lot of human processes that we represent in CLM. And what we're trying to do is try and understand both how we represent the processes and the effect on the climate, but also how the climate impacts human processes. So start linking in an impact modeling sense. And so what I did here is just put a few of the different types of human processes that we do have represented in the CLM model. But there's still a large number of processes we don't include. And in this case, it was CO2 emissions from ground transportation, which would be very difficult to actually simulate in the model. You could start thinking about how you would do that, but it's a complex process where you'd have to represent all the transport and the humans and what was happening. So this is one of the processes we don't represent. But as the model goes on, we're trying to increase its complexity and its representation. So this may be something that gets included in a future version. Going to the next question. Yeah, basically what I really wanted to do is say, yeah, all these things are a part of what's going on in terms of the representation of how complex the land surface is. So instead of seeing where we started off in the 1980s and 1990s was we had the single grid cells, which were just this one representation of what the land surface looked like, communicating with the atmosphere. Now we have this really complex hierarchy of land units and land cover classes within that. And each of those has a different set of properties and a different set of fluxes to the atmosphere. And I just really wanted to get you thinking about, well, how do we represent that really sort of like that really complex heterogeneous landscape in the model? So, and pretty much everyone said that's exactly that was what the model does. So that was really good. Getting to the next question. Yeah, again, just wanted to sort of get some idea of like, there's all these complex things happening in terms of how the way the environment is impacting plants and how we represent them, and also the way we represent the complexity of the land surface. But there's still a lot of things we don't actually capture. And yeah, pretty much everyone worked out that it was insect outbreaks that we don't currently model in CLM. It's one of those things that it's the complexity of trying to get the populations of insects. Yeah, sorry.
I think Ben just accidentally probably unmuted himself.
Oh, okay. So
Not-
just keep going?
Yeah.
Okay, great. This one was really just to get you thinking about, there's just so many different ways we can configure out the CSM model. And a big part of that is understanding how much control you have over which parts of the model are on or off based on the configuration you choose. And it wasn't really to test whether you knew all of these configurations and what they did. It's just more the idea that there are standard configurations. And then when we went through we'll go through, there's a query config tool, which goes through in the practical session, where we go through and we can see how you tell CLM which components are on and which components are off for a particular configuration. And yeah, I didn't want to make this too confusing. So yeah, they're all of them are true. So none of them are actually, those statements are false. So and I think everyone sort of worked that one out. The final question I have was like thinking about spin-up times and getting the model into equilibrium. So the question is actually a trick question, which I think most people realized, is the fact that it depends on which processes you're really interested in and what your initial conditions are. So if you're starting from initial conditions that are spun up and working with the current climate that you're looking at, yes, the model will be pretty much in equilibrium when you start, but it can take thousands of years to bring the carbon cycle into equilibrium. And it's really important to think about that when you're running the model and when you're setting up and doing experiments with it. You can't just take the model and like run it without doing enough thought about, well, what is the model in equilibrium with? And if I'm going to do some form of sensitivity experiments or look at some form of transient historical or paleo run, how can I be able to understand the results I'm getting out in the terms of how well spun up the model is? So it can take between 10 years to get the hydrology into configuration, up to thousands of years to get the carbon cycle. And so one of the practical ways you can get around that is always sort of like think about, well, what initial conditions am I going to use for this? And we have a whole range of initial conditions for CLM that have been spun up within the land model working group and at NCAR. And working with us to like actually work that out is really important. So I just really wanted to get people thinking about that as like the final part of the quiz. So that was, yeah, really good. And if people have any questions about that, I'm happy to start discussion on that. Or we can go to the questions that were posed through the website. I'm happy to do either of those. So maybe we'll just like at the end of the quiz, we can sort of have a discussion. Or if anyone else from the panel wanted to speak about any of these as well, I have something they want to add. Very happy to do that now. Okay. All right. Well, maybe we'll just move on to some of the online questions that were posed through the chats, through the query. So the first question was, does CLM5 provide a single column version for parameterization testing? And the answer is yes. The model can be run in point mode with forcing data, and you can also couple it to CAM in single atmospheric column mode. So that's one way that you can run the model, and you can definitely do parameterization testing that way. There's a lot of other ways you can do, like understanding parameterization sensitivity, which we can get into in the discussion a little later from other questions. But the answer is yes. This can be done in a single point rather than run globally or for a sort of a fixed domain. What are the priorities for things to change in future versions of CLM? And this is a really good question. It's really sort of open. And there are many components we're trying to look at right now. So from crop representation through to full ecosystem modeling with fates. Will, Dave, Danica, do you want to step in on this one? So what are the priorities going forward on this? Do you have just a quick one, so one or two pieces that you can add to that? And Dave or Will? Yeah.
Sure, I can go. So yeah, I guess there's two, or yeah, probably two main developments that I would say are kind of the up and coming big improvements to CLM. And so one of them Peter mentioned is FATES, which is the functionally assembled terrestrial ecosystem simulator. So that's a way of starting to think about the role of disturbance and how disturbance affects the structure of ecosystems. And it also kind of removes the prognostic, we're going to tell the model where plants grow, and in like fully running fates, the fates model will figure out where tropical forests grow and where boreal forests grow, where grasslands are. And thinking about the role of climate change and disturbance and structuring those ecosystems. So that's more kind of on the ecosystem side of things. And then on the hydrology side of things, I think the hill slope model that Sean Swenson is developing is probably the most exciting development that'll be coming into future versions of the model. So Sean's got, and the idea behind the representative hill slope model is that you've got upland land units that are hydrologically connected to lowland land units. So the uplands might be dry, the lowlands might be wet. And there's also a sense of aspect, as well as precipitation downscaling, so that mountaintops in the model get more snow than the valleys, for example. So it again allows us to increase this kind of subgrid heterogeneity that the models, with one set of atmospheric inputs from CAM or from reanalysis, we're able to kind of capture more of the subgrid variability that happens, especially related to hydrology. So it wasn't a short answer, but
That was a
those
great
would be
answer.
the two.
Thanks, Will. No, I think that's a
developments I
really
would put
good.
in there.
Yeah, thanks a lot. That's a really good perspective. Like the hydrology and the ecosystem dynamics are two really key areas that we're looking at. So yeah, thanks.
And Daniel dropped, I think that's probably Sean's paper on the kind of preliminary work from the hill slope model. There's a lot more that he's done since that paper came out.
Right. Brilliant. Yeah. And like the land group and land model working group is definitely the place to be involved with this if you want to be part of the ongoing developments and the ongoing sort of work with CTSM now, so the community terrestrial systems model. Okay, next question. How do we quantify and reduce uncertainty in the land surface models such as CLM? And so there's a number of things that we do. And the first one is we sort of analyze the modeling results. We can confront them with observations for the historical period. And one of the key tools we have for that is this tool ILAM, which is a benchmarking tool. And so what we do is we allow the model to be compared to a large range of observational products and see model biases and model relative scores across a range of metrics. The other one we do is we look at model into comparisons, such as the coupled model into comparison project, CMIP6, which is where we see large Earth system modeling simulations done by modeling centers all over the world, and we compare the results that come out of those. And then there's just the normal process by analysis and writing papers, to being able to understand what the model does and sort of documenting that. We also have an active parameter uncertainty investigations that are occurring with understanding how certain parameters affect both the carbon cycle and the surface climate response of the model. We're going to get into that a little bit later, so I'll most probably skip that until a future question. Okay. So the next question is, parameter tuning required for running CLM5? And if yes, are there internally supported tools or external tools used? So the CLM5 model itself has been extensively tuned to get the best results for the current day and historical transient climates for CESM, and also for when we've got land-only configurations where we're simulating it with meteorology, either reanalysis meteorology or observed meteorology. But there are ongoing efforts to understand the parameter centers and uncertainties within the CSM model, land model working group. And Danny, do you want to have a little bit of a contribution here and just sort of maybe suggest how that project is going and what's involved with that, just so we can.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm Daniel Kennedy. I'm a postdoc at NCAR, and I've been working primarily on this parameter perturbation experiment. We found about 200 tunable parameters in CLM. and we all work together to come up with ranges, reasonable ranges for those parameters. And now we're doing a big experiment testing, running the model by perturbing all of those parameters one at a time, and then perturbing them in a multi-factor way. And what we're hoping to find out is, how much parametric uncertainty there is in certain physical aspects of the model, like the carbon cycle, but also maybe hopefully develop some sort of established workflow for tuning parameters in the future.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks a lot, Daniel. That's, yeah, and I think we're going to get back to that in another question. So we'll get onto that then.
Peter, can I expand on that just a little bit?
Oh, absolutely.
To say that the tuning that went on for say, for example, CLM5 within CSM2 was all hand tuning. So expert judgment and adjusting parameters based on experimentation with the model rather than any automated tuning algorithm. And what Daniel said is we're hoping to move towards something that's more automated, but it's very, very challenging to do automated tuning for a global model. With many different plant types, many different ecosystems and ecoregions around the world. And so I don't think any group, of the other major modeling groups has successfully solved this problem yet either, and we don't know if we will. So it's a challenge, and it is a known limitation with these models the really uncertain parameters and the large number of parameters.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks. Okay, so the next question was, in CLM5, impact of ozone is also added. How good is ozone parameterization? What are the additional processes required to improve the impact of ozone on plant growth processes? And so, yes, I was going to say, yes, I do know that it's actually implemented and there are ongoing work going with it. But this is a project that Danica Lombardozzi is the chief person on. So I'm going to hand over to Danica if you're on, Danica.
Yep. Yeah, I'm on. So the ozone parameterization in CLM5, well, it exists, it's there, but it is not turned on by default. So you have to do that. And we haven't actually, it was developed in CLM 4.5 and was tested and evaluated in that model, but not as extensively in CLM5 with all the changes that came in. So I guess those are the caveats. The way that it's represented is that ozone decreases both photosynthesis and stomatal conductance directly, and then all downstream processes are affected. So there's currently working on, I guess the other piece to the ozone representation in CLM5 is that currently the ozone concentration is not something that is connected to any file or the atmosphere model. So that's something that you have to do on your own, but we are in the process of adding the hooks actually. So I think some of those pull requests are getting resolved this week even, to connect the atmosphere model ozone to the CLM ozone. I could go into more detail if people are interested, but I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Danica. That's excellent. Yeah, and so it's an ongoing project, and like if you have more that you'd like to talk about, Danica's obviously the person to talk to.
Right, and there's a paper in Journal of Climate that describes or there's a few papers, I guess, but that's the one that describes it. So I can look for that and put it in the chat.
Great, thanks. Okay, next question. Does CLM5 consider changing plant mechanism processes, e.g. photosynthesis and transpiration due to diffuse and direct light? Also, is UV radiation on photosynthesis parameterized in CLM5? So for the first part of the question, yes, we have direct and diffuse visible and near infrared light are explicitly represented. And so they're represented through the two-stream radiation model in CLM5. And at a leaf level, radiation absorption is directly, explicitly simulated. UV radiation is not explicitly represented, nor is damage from UV included in plant photosynthesis. So that's obviously an area that's open for further investigation. But yes, and there are ongoing studies looking at the role of cloud scattering of light to get the direct diffuse components, and whether that what impacts you have from radiation scattering and diffuse versus direct components through the canopy. There are some unexpected ways that direct versus diffuse light works in terms of canopy radiation, and especially in terms of how much light gets through to shaded leaves within the canopy. But the UV component is still something that is yet to be developed. Okay, are the land use land cover changes updated annually in CLM, or can they progress at a prescribed time to make land use land cover change process more realistic? So the default way we do it in CLM5 is to do it on January 1st of each year. The land use land cover change is updated. Previous versions, we actually did it on the half-hour time step of the model. One of the things we ran into with that was that wood harvest ended up being really, really small increments rather than being episodic events, which had some pretty big impacts in terms of the way that we understood land, like the wood harvest. So we went to this January 1st component. One of the things that we didn't want is to have this large instantaneous burst of carbon fluxes, which would be associated with that land cover change event on the 1st of January. So what we do is we actually release the carbon from those instantaneous land use effects across the whole year, rather than just like as a big pulse on January 1st. That's so the atmosphere doesn't see this sort of crazy sort of burst of carbon coming out globally. You can actually choose the time stepping that you want for the land use land cover change, but by default it is this January 1st component. And unless you really think about it, I think that's most probably the best way to keep on running the model for now. The idea that you would like to be able to set up for a particular site, you can still do an event at a particular point in time. So if you were running the model, say for a limited domain, you could do that if you want to, but in its global configuration and the way it's default set up, it's done on January 1st. Next question, how is land cover change handled in paleo simulations where there are no historical data sets to use as inputs? And the answer is, well, we have this, what we call no anthropogenic configuration for vegetation distributions prior to human disturbance. And that basically allows us to do like basically through the Holocene period, which is sort of like very similar climate to current day. When we get outside of like the Holocene climate, we need to start looking at vegetation reconstructions based on climate, looking at where you would find ice sheets and those sort of components. And that's a project that the paleo group do a lot of work with. So we do the last glacial maxima, or we do other periods sort of in deep time. So and in this component, you're actually prescribing that. So you have to construct up the plant functional type distributions for the period of time you look at. Obviously, you wouldn't be doing human land use at those sort of time periods because there were no humans actually around to do things like that. So what we have is typically static vegetation distributions for those reconstructed periods. One of the nice things about FATES, which is going to be this new ecosystem model that we'll have running, is that you have the potential there to have the model responding to climate and finding a new equilibrium vegetation distributions and getting the bioclimatic distributions of that vegetation based on a previous climate period. What I've just shown here is basically the idea of like how tree cover occurred through the time period, sort of from 6,000 years before Common Era through to current day, and then sort of future projections out of tree cover under different socioeconomic scenarios. So this is the sort of way we represent land use land cover change. I'll get to the next question as well. I think it's the next question is, oh no, sorry. This is looking at the carbon cycle. So the carbon cycle is well, this is the next question. So the next question is, the carbon cycle is well quantified and the nitrogen cycle seems to be poorly quantified in CLM. However, CLM considers the impact of nitrogen on CO2 fertilization process. Is it possible this ambiguity can deteriorate the CO2 fertilization effect simulated by CLM? So I'm not sure if this is actually true, if there's this huge difference in terms of the representation quantification between nitrogen and carbon cycles. I'm open to someone else taking this as like, because this is kind of, it's a big question in terms of CO2 fertilization and nutrient limitation. And we're doing a lot of work on this, but I'm not sure this is actually as well defined as this question has put it out there in terms of the research and the scientific knowledge. Does someone else from the group want to talk about that? Maybe Dave or Will or somebody else? Happy to let someone else step in.
It's Will.
Sure. Yeah, I guess I'm trying to figure out. I guess I'm not a little fuzzy on the question. I guess So, and maybe whoever asked the question could raise their hand to clarify. I guess, with that, if that person does or doesn't want to step forward, I will say that there's pretty significant improvements to how we think about the plant on the plant side of the representation of nitrogen limitation in the model. And there's still quite a bit of work to be done on the soil side and thinking about plant soil competition for nitrogen that are less well resolved. And I can point, I'll drop it in chat a minute to a paper that I led in the CLM5 kind of documentation suite of papers that showed that CLM5 is much less sensitive to nitrogen limitation than previous versions of the model, and it does show a stronger sensitivity to CO2 fertilization effects, but both of those seem to be in the right direction relative to previous versions of the model. So there's definitely work to be done. I think coupled carbon nitrogen biogeochemistry is one of the harder things that CLM is trying to do. And
I would say that the assistant community is struggling to define these and
Yeah.
quantify these as
Yep.
well. It's not something that's
Yep.
unique to CSM or
No,
CLM anyway.
definitely not unique to what we're trying to do. And it's also to me, it's also an exciting avenue of research because it is pretty new science.
And I would also say that you can't do the carbon cycle without the nitrogen cycle. Like it's, you can do some representation of the carbon cycle, but the two are so tightly linked and coupled that the idea that we have one that works really well and one that doesn't is probably like a misnomer. Okay, next question. How to get started working on the improvement of the crop mechanical process in CLM5 and improve the model. So this is a great question, and I'm going to throw this out to Danica because Danica is leading a project looking at including AppSim model capabilities in CLM crop. And so I'll hand it over to you, Danica, if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks. There are many ways that you can get started on working on the crop model. And we're still currently using the existing crop model, and that one will continue to work within CLM, but we're also developing new capabilities. It's work led by Bin Peng at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign and myself, and with a lot of help from Bill Sachs on the software engineering side. And so the way that the current crop model works is that there are 3 different phenological phases and 4 different triggers. There are multiple different crop types. The way that the new AppSim model being integrated, which is going to be, it's going to be called CLM Axis. And basically that's going to allow for more flexible phenology and allocation schemes that can allow for different numbers of phenological phases and stages by crop type, and also different types of stress during those different phenological phases. And so it's going to be an improvement. It's still a work in progress. We're starting to get closer to having all the hooks connected with CLM so we can start doing some basic testing, but it's still going to take some time to develop. So I would say if you want to start working on it, you're welcome to email me if you'd like, and we can talk more. But yeah, otherwise, talk to any of us, I guess I should say, and we can help point you in the right direction.
Great, thanks so much. Okay, next question. I learned that each component of the CSM can be run independently or combined, e.g. CLM CAM. If I'm interested in an air-land exchange, and I only want to have CAM and CLM, are there still working interactions through the coupler, or is there a channel that connects the two? And so what I was going to say, yes, the F configuration, when you set it up with CLM and CAM, runs directly through the coupler. So what we do is the coupler is able to take either data products or fully coupled products, and the different configurations tell which models will be active and how the coupler will be handling those. But when we run it in an F configuration where we're what we call AMIP, we're basically telling the ocean and the sea ice, this is where you are, this is how you're going to evolve sort of month-to-month basis. And the atmosphere and the land then run So it takes out 1 degree of the sort of feedbacks, and so you don't get ocean feedbacks, you don't get sea ice feedbacks. It allows you to be able to sort of like more precisely look at the response between the atmosphere and the land. One of the things to think about is, yes, it's exactly the same. There's just the coupler is like taking data from the other models rather than looking at having dynamically interacting models from the other, those sea ice and ocean processes. So go to the next question. So this was a follow-up question to that one. How does CAM use the CLM outputs as inputs? For example, how can CAM use the NH3 fluxes generated from FAN, this FAN model, which was I put a paper in here from Vera et al. As emissions input to carry out atmospheric chemistry modeling, i.e. study the budgets of NH3 into the atmosphere. And so what I was going to say here as my initial response to this is basically NH3, you can either prescribe the emissions through data sets. So you could take what came out of a FAN run, or there is an actual active project with the FAN model. And I was going to actually hand that over to Will or Dave to talk about, because I don't know what the status on that particular project is.
Yeah, so as background, so FAN is, what does it stand for? Fluxes of agricultural nitrogen or something like that. Anyway, it allows for prognostic simulation of NH3 fluxes from fertilizer and manure application to the atmosphere. And we don't have, so that's the exciting part about FAN, is this prognostic handling of ammonia emissions. We don't have a transient data set to run FAN with though, and so its application has been a little bit limited to kind of present day simulations, and then Julius did some future simulations out through 2100 under RCP 8.5. So FAN is part of the CESM code base or the CLM code base, but it hasn't been integrated into CLM 5. And I think it's an active kind of area of interest with the atmospheric chemistry working group and the land model working group to try to get these more prognostics, nitrogen fluxes of reactive nitrogen gases from the land surface to into CAM. It's a little bit of a circular answer. So it's the capability is there, but I don't think it's very robust for folks that are interested in having these nitrogen species and methane, for that matter, actually be passed from the land to the atmosphere. I think it's an open avenue of research that people can explore.
Peter, can I expand real quick?
Yeah.
Just in general, fluxes of any species can be passed back and forth between CAM and CLM, and it just requires a relatively minor additions to the coupler and the component models. And so we're always adding new fluxes of these species as new processes are developed, or we're trying to get new couplings. So Don could just explain the ozone one is one we're working on now. Will talked about the reactive nitrogen, but we already emit biogenic volatile organic compounds in the atmosphere, which they use that. We emit dust from the land and other chemical species, but methane, for example, is not being passed to the atmosphere, even though we're calculating it, partly because we don't have similar fluxes from the ocean model yet. So this coupling is always sort of the technical challenges are small. The scientific challenges tend to be quite big to get, all the components passing the right fluxes back and forth.
Great, perfect. Okay, next question. Is it possible to run a basic case and transfer model outputs from that simulation to a local environment, which can then be used for my own study? For instance, if I do need soil moisture content data, both actual or saturated, is CLM able to produce that? And so I was sort of thinking about this question, and definitely, I mean, if you've run the model and it takes a little bit of work, but you've got all these NetCDF history files, and they can be converted to a range of formats and resolutions, either through tools like Python or IDL or other analysis tools that you have. And then you can either load them up into a GIS package like ArcGIS, or if that's what you're looking at. The other side of it is, and I was trying to think of the question, can you prescribe soil moisture back into the model? And that is something you can do as well. We do have a capability now to prescribe soil moisture so that rather than the soil moisture evolving within CLM as it's running, we're actually updating it with observed soil moisture, so that we have both ways of being able to take your study region and be able to either take the data out of your model runs and then use it in other impact studies and also for other analyses, or to be able to take some of your observational data and put it back into the model. So if anyone wants to sort of like maybe expand on that, or maybe we'll just leave it there. That's, yeah, okay.
I guess I can add a little bit more. And so it's not just soil moisture. So for example, I'm a soil biogeochemist and have this kind of standalone model that plays next to CLM and uses CLM inputs, but it doesn't feed back into CLM. So it's a way that you can kind of develop a toy model. This is the way FAN was developed also. You can develop a model that uses the outputs for CLM to run whatever it is that you're interested in. That can be at a grid cell, it can be globally gridded. And so it is kind of it's a nice way to do model development, is with this kind of one-way coupling where you take outputs from CLM and use them as an input into your favorite component of an ecosystem model.
Great, thanks, Will. Yeah, that's yeah, exactly. So beyond just doing like GIS type studies, you can actually put it into another model. Perfect. Okay, next question. Will you include schemes, functions, modules that are developed by the CSM users? If you find a study by someone who uses CSM is really advancing the understanding of some processes, will this piece of work be incorporated into the future version of the model so that the community will benefit from that? And yes, definitely. This is a really important component. CSM and CTSM and CLM are community models, which have been developed as a partnership between NCAR and the wider community. So this isn't just a model that we developed at NCAR. This is a model that has experts in many, many different fields throughout like our wide community of users. And I'll put a call out here, the land and biogeochemistry working groups, which are part of CSM project, they're the key way to be integrated into this process. So if you come to the meetings, if you work with Will, who's, and perhaps give Will, I'll let you have a shout out here, but the importance of being involved in the working groups in terms of being involved in the way that the model is going forward and the key decisions that are being made, and also incorporating new science. I'll let you have something in there if you want, Will.
Sure. Yeah, being involved in any of the working groups, so this is true for the land or biogeochemistry working groups, but also it's true for any other model components. There's working groups for all of them, and it really helps us. It helps us know what developments you're working on, and what science questions you have, if you can be involved in those working groups. And so, one example on the land side would be Daniel Kennedy's work to improve plant hydraulic stress. So Daniel came as a graduate student and did a lot of great work that's in CLM5 now to improve the representation of plant hydraulic stress in the model. And so that's an example of a pretty big component and a big change that was a community contribution to improving CTSM. And by working relatively closely with us at NCAR, Daniel was successful in getting that into the model, and now he's here as a postdoc. So it's a good way. It's a good way to get involved, and it's easier for everybody if you kind of have frequent communication with the working group and the working group liaison and the co-chair and other people that are involved in the CESM effort.
Yeah, I'll just point out that Will is actually the co-chair, one of the co-chairs for the land model working group. So if you want to, like, he's definitely a good person to contact, but also Keith is still the liaison for the land model working group. Yeah, so Keith Olson's also the other key person to talk to. That said, we have forums within the CSM website that people can post questions to as well, and become more involved in the community and the way the model is being developed. If you find things that are issues with the model, raising them through the working groups is really good too. Okay, next question. Is it possible to change the PFT in CLM? If it's possible, what is the file that have to be changed, and is there a tool to do it? So yes, definitely. This is one of the key things that I work on, is looking at describing land use and land cover change, and how plant functional types, crop functional types, all the different land units such as the crop area or the natural vegetation area change, wood harvest. And we have two files that specify both land cover and land use. And the first one is the initial surface data file. which contains all the static components. It tells you the initial distribution of vegetation, plus also things like soils and soil color. It tells you all the hydrological properties such as slope and elevation. So those all come into the surface data file. And then we have a transient file, which basically is this annual time series called the land use time series file. And it updates plant functional types and crop functional types and the relative weights of the crop versus natural vegetation area. It also does things like prescribes irrigation and fertilizer, wood harvest, and all those components are in the land use time series file. There are tools for generating both of these files, and this is sort of a little bit of the workflow that comes through. So we have a tool called the CLM5 Land Use Data Tool, which you can contact me, but it's available on GitHub. And we have all the data sets that go into that also stored on our Dask server. We then generate these what we call raw CLM files, which are typically they're a quarter degree resolution, but we also generate them at 0.5 degrees resolution. And they go into a tool called MakeSurf data. And so MakeSurf data takes this transient time series data plus all the other raw data sets that I was talking about. So all the soils data, the elevation data, and generates the surface data file and the land use time series file. We're very happy to help people with land use experiments and simulations and how do we actually go about generating these files. I'm currently writing up the tech note that goes with the land use data tool, and also gives you an idea about what is going on in terms of the other raw data sets that are going into CLM. Hopefully have that finished off very soon, and that will provide some background documentation for using these tools as well. Okay, next question.
Peter, can I add something on that? I might go back to that question. The other way to interpret that question was, can you change the definition of a plant functional type in the model? And the answer to that is, it's not, yes, you can. It's hard to add an additional PFT. We currently have, I think 14 or 15 natural plant functional types. And people in the past have modified a PFT or added a PFT by modifying the parameters associated with each plant type. And so if you know what the parameter values should be for all the key plant parameters, you can introduce a new PFT. The way you would have to do it, though, is to overwrite an existing PFT. And so really the only way people have done this to date is to say, if you have a study focused on the Western US and you want to represent 3 different coniferous tree types, you can do that and overwrite maybe the tropical trees because you're not going to need to use them. Adding a new PFT completely to get 16 natural PFTs or 17 natural PFTs is actually quite challenging at the moment. We'd like to make that easier, but that's sort of the state of where we are.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Okay, so as a non-expert on land modeling, how well constrained are potential spurious feedbacks of land cover change in CSM? E.g., suppose some forests spuriously disappear by 2100 in models. Has the effect on, for example, climate sensitivity been studied? And so, yes, just getting back to that, we definitely put land use and land cover change, and we look at a whole range of different potential scenarios as well. So we're able to compare different land cover trajectories. So we could look at what would happen in a world where we did large-scale reforestation. And so we can see how that would impact surface climate through changing surface energy budgets and changing the hydrological cycle. But we can also see how it impacts the carbon cycle. So where the carbon is being stored in wood products or how the soil carbon is changing. So this is definitely an area where we're looking at being able to do that. And I guess the previous question, the answer to that sort of tells you these are the tools we have for doing that. This is prescriptive ways of running CLM5. As we spin up into the FATES model, which should be available sometime soon, we'll be able to look at being able to see what happens in terms of feedbacks within ecosystems as well. So that if we saw a large-scale drying and increase in fires in the Amazon, we would see what would happen with the dieback of the Amazon in terms of precipitation recycling and drought locking and things like that. So we have this capability currently in CLM5, and this will be as we get more and more of the ecosystem dynamics into the model, we'll be able to take that even further. I think that's the last question. So I'm going to stop sharing there and probably just open up the floor for questions and discussion with all of the participants. Yeah, so if people, I guess there's a lot of questions raised, there's raised hands, and there's a lot of questions in the chat. So maybe I'll just start going through the chat to start with. And there's a lot of specific, and I see people have actually answered a lot of these questions.
Peter, I think we've answered a lot of the questions in the
Yeah.
chat by chat. Maybe we should go for
Okay, maybe we'll just leave it.
a new question.
That sounds great. So if people want to raise their hand, or I think that's probably a good way of doing it. Okay, Jianyun, do you want to unmute yourself and ask a question? Maybe put your camera on as well, just so we can, if you want to. If you don't, then that's fine too.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to turn it on. So hi everyone. Yeah, I'm so sorry that I missed the time to put my question in the poll yesterday. So I chose to ask you directly. So my question is about the dust emissions in the CLM model. Because I'm currently working specifically on simulating the global dust cycle, like including the dust emissions, the transport, the depositions. And I have looked at some papers that using the Earth system models to manually turn on and off the dust emissions from some specific dust source regions. And I'm wondering if it is also workable for the coupled CAM and CLM model. And I have asked this question in the CAM Q&A section, and their answers that the dust emission is a bit tricky to be modified as it is coupled with the CLM model. So I'm thinking that is there a way to modify the dust emission, like in the regional scales in the CLM5?
I can try to answer. Do you want to like turn off dust completely, or you want to cut it in half, or?
Yeah, like manually just turn it off. Like this source region have no dust emitted right here, so that I can specifically look at the global dust loadings emitted from one specific source region.
Yeah. So there is no, automated way to do this now. Like you just give it a data set that it could read in, but you could certainly do it. There'd be two ways. One is you could introduce a data set with a mask that you read in. And, if you wanted to do that, I think we most likely would be best if we give you a little bit of guidance on that. But it shouldn't be too hard. The alternative is you just want to, stop emissions from a box, you could go into the code and essentially put a if statement in there and say, if it's within that box, turn off the dust emissions. And we have done that kind of thing in the past. So that's, that would work as well. That would also not be that'd be the easiest way to do it. And again, if you have any problems with that, we could help. But there's nothing like saying, just like a switch or something like that currently in the model to turn off in a region. Okay,
thanks. So it's sort of like you have to like specifically turning the models with the code instead of just changing the parameters, the basic modifications.
Yeah, I don't think there would be any way to change the parameters. There is a dust erodibility file. And another possible way is to go in and modify that dust erodibility file to make, I don't know what the value would be, to make it extremely not erodible, like a really big or really small number. I don't know which way the numbers go. That's another alternative that might work. That would not require you to modify the code. I've never really played with that file at all, so I don't know, what it looks like. But that would be another potential avenue. In fact, now that I think about it, that might be the best option, and see if that works. You might still have a small amount of dust emissions with a really low erodibility, but it might be small enough that it serves the purpose of what you're trying to study.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Right. If we don't have any other questions, Katie and Keith, I don't know if you want to have anything about the questions that have been raised through. I know, Katie, you've done a lot of work in terms of the parameter uncertainty and understanding how we go about using large-scale perturbation studies. Do you want to maybe just have a little bit of a statement about the work you're doing with that?
Sure. Yeah, I'm glad this was kind of already covered in the question about uncertainty, but there's lots of different sources of uncertainty in our model projections. So Peter mentioned looking at different CMIP scenarios. So that's kind of thinking about forcing uncertainty and how we don't know the exact carbon emissions pathway. And then we have structural uncertainty in the model, and Dave actually shared an ILAM link in the chat, which compared the different versions of CLM, CLM4, CLM 4.5, and CLM5. And that's kind of a nice example of looking across structural uncertainty, because we've made like significant changes to the models over time. That particular example probably includes both structural and parametric uncertainty, because we've made changes both to the actual physical equations that are used in the model and the parameters. And so the third source of uncertainty is the parametric uncertainty, and that's what Daniel alluded to at the beginning when we were talking about the parameter perturbation experiments that we're doing. And so by kind of sampling across what we think are different reasonable parameter values in CLM, and there are a lot, and it's a very, sort of uncertain and big space, we can try to start to reduce some of that source of uncertainty. Yeah, I think I'll just leave it at that.
Thanks, Katie. And Keith, we talked about land use and land cover change, but we didn't really talk about the urban model, which I have seen a lot of interest on the CSM forums, and I think that's a really important area. Do you want to have just a little bit of a spiel about the urban model and how we try and represent different ways humans change the landscape from that perspective?
Yeah, sure. So we represent urban land units with the urban canyon model. Kind of consists of roads, walls, and then a roof. And we have the capability of having up to 3 different types of those urban land units in a grid cell, kind of categorized by density, tall building district, and high density, and then medium density. And those differ in terms of their kind of basic properties, such as the building heights and surface characteristics such as albedo and thermal conductivity and that kind of thing, like different wall types and different roof types, and et cetera. Currently, I'll say that the urban land units are static, so they're kind of fixed at present day. So there's no urban land units don't change over time. They don't expand or contract over time. But we have a project, Lei Zhao at the University of Illinois, who is working on developing data sets to change urban land units over time and try to incorporate those into the model and try to understand the impacts of future urbanization. So.
Thanks, Keith. That's great. Yeah, and I guess one of the things about urban is it's only a very small fraction of the land surface right now. It doesn't have a large climate impact, but people live in the urban environment, and people are impacted by climate change differently in the urban environment. And Keith's done a lot of work on that. So it's currently around about 0.5% of the whole land surface of the world is represented by the urban model, but it has a really important component for our understanding of impacts and our understanding of the future climate, how people will experience it. So it's a really important component, even though it's a small fraction of the land surface in terms of fluxes to the atmosphere.
Right, and I think that's probably going to change in the future. Some of the urbanization scenarios are quite impressive in terms of how much urban area is going to expand, and more people in the future are going to be living in urban areas. So it's important to understand how different the urban climate is compared to the kind of the climate we look at, was just in the model, which is vegetation climate. So
yeah, no, absolutely. I just started rereading the Isaac Asimov Foundation series, and the key planet in that is all urban. There's just nothing beside built environment in that. So it's an interesting component. I see that Hemaraj has got his hand raised. So do you have a question? I think we're about to probably end our time here because we're at 9:45. So I'll let Hemaraj have his question, and then maybe Gustavo, you can take back over.
I'm looking for the land use time series data and soft data, like for the future, looking for different SSP scenarios. And then, this I didn't find the urban scenario for the future, because I was changing the PCT net PFT and then trying to change the PCT crop and PCT CFT like this. But when I just change the PCT crop, then there is an error, like the sum is not 1. Obviously there will be the error, right? So I tried to change the PCT net vegetation, and I was like looking for the future urban and future glaciers and many things, right? But I didn't find that. So did I miss anything, or like it is not available?
Right. So it's really interesting that you bring that up. So like with as Keith said, with the urban distributions, they're static in the model right now. But okay, we've got some breakout rooms about to go. But what I was going to say was you can actually, if you wanted to create your own urban, you can put it through MakeSurf and generate a static new urban data set. That's one way of doing it. The plant functional types, we've spent a lot of time trying to incorporate ways so that we always meet all the criteria. So it always has to add up to 100%. You can't have 98% or even 99.999%. It'll crash out the model. That's the area you're talking about. So we have tools that do high precision and work out how to do the allocation. I'm very happy to talk with you offline on this. Is probably the easiest way rather than trying to force into the last 30 seconds. But maybe we'll just leave it there. There are tools that are available. We've got GitHub repositories for them and data sets to support them. So let's have a talk offline on that one. Thank you to all the panelists. It was brilliant. All your contributions, very, very valuable. Thanks for all the questions from all the participants in the CSM tutorial. I hope this has been give you some insight into how we do research with the model and who some of the key people who are working and supporting the model